Hey, hello again, everybody, and welcome to the 17th Annual Newburyport Documentary Film Festival. I am Program Director James Sullivan, and we are conducting interviews with some of our feature film directors who will be featured in our festival next month, September 17th through the 19th, and also streaming through the 26th of September for those of you who can't make it in person. Today we're talking about one of our feature films, Gary K. Uh, Susan, why did I blank on the One Step at a Time? Gary K. One Step at a Time. Um, the film is directed by Susan Gray, who's maybe a familiar face to some of you who have come to the festival in previous years. Susan has had a couple of her films featured with us in past years, and she's also served as one of our judges several times. So we can talk to her a little bit about that, but specifically about the film, Gary K. One Step at a Time. The film is about the aforementioned Gary K., who is, I think it's safe to say, a unique individual. He is a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and he's also a stage performer. And the film is about his work towards creating a two-man play about the co-founders of Alcoholics Anonymous. And Gary is, as you'll see, a little bit of a piece of work. So we're looking forward to screening the film. And right now we're going to show you a little glimpse of it by rolling the trailer.
I started drinking when I was about 12. When I was 16, I was in an automobile wreck and killed people. And I decided that the day I graduated high school, I would leave and go to New York. And the Broadway Limited Amtrak stopped through my hometown outside of Akron. And I had a cardboard suitcase with jeans, a white shirt, a blue blazer, a carton of Camel non-filters, and a bottle of Teacher's Scotch. And off I went to New York City.
And this is where my serious drinking and drugging began. You never drank? I'm also allergic to it. Every time I drink it, I break out in handcuffs.
Happy to welcome director Susan Gray to the Newburyport Documentary Film Festival and our preview of your film. Thanks for being here, Susan. Appreciate it.
Hello, James Sullivan. Nice to be here in this capacity.
Yeah, so we'll get to that, your alternate capacities with the film festival in a minute, but let's just start with Gary. Tell me the basic story about how you met him and how you broached the conversation with him about doing a film about him.
Yeah, it didn't really go like that. So it began with a play in Boston about, over 10 years now. Bester Cram, who's the head of Northern Light Productions, where I was working at the time, had gone to see a play called Bill W. and Dr. Bob that told the story of the founders of AAA. And he came back saying, well, this would make a really great American experience because the story of Bill W., who was the founder of AA, they were both from Vermont, and I'm from Vermont, is really the story of America. He started drinking during World War I, and then he became a stock analyst during the Roaring '20s while the stock market was soaring. And then, he collapsed in addiction as the stock market collapsed, and he created AA and pulled himself out of it while the country was pulling itself out of it. And the country's sort of struggling with what do we do with this horrible raging problem of alcoholism, because there was so much trauma at that time. And they tried a government solution, prohibition, to deal with it.
Right.
And I think, as we got more and more into the story and started figuring out, well, that's not what Bill did. Bill came up with a spiritual solution to this problem. What was it about AA that was so special? And we started going to meetings, and when you sit inside the meeting rooms, you realize there's something going on in that room. It's really spirituality today. It's quite remarkable. There's a lot of humor and there's a lot of pain and suffering, but there's this collective human story that everybody's telling together. It was really profound. And so we started, we had a DOP, Josh Morton, who volunteered on the project. He was in California shooting feature films, and he said, you guys, I've learned about your project. You need somebody in the program, because we were all normies. So he joined the team, and we went out and started filming our film about Bill W. and Dr. Bob. But all we had was this lousy kind of old footage of Bill W., and it wasn't the emotion we were feeling doing the story wasn't coming through. So the playwright who had written this film, Bill W. and Dr. Bob, that played at the Newburyport Theater in Watertown, said there are these two guys playing Bill W. and Dr. Bob who are real life Bill W. and Dr. Bobs. Gary himself, the actor who plays Bill W., had fallen off the wagon. He actually was a huge music theater performer. He went all over the world. He played Daddy Warbucks and Annie more than anybody on the planet. And then when he went to audition for the Broadway revival of Annie, he had a total meltdown and collapsed into his addiction and ended up never doing the role. And when he hit bottom, he called a guy named Richard Springle in New York City, and Richard ended up playing Dr. Bob. So there was this chemistry between the two of them that was amazing, and amazing on stage. But Gary had this ability to, he's a very emotional person. He cries easily, he laughs easily, to put emotion into, but he's really smart. He's incredibly brilliant. So he could explain the principles of AA and why it worked, and the emotion of AA, and show the emotion. So we continued to try and raise money over the years for this American Experience style film. We kept writing grants for NEH. We kept coming close. And as this was going on, I became really good friends with Gary. And I was watching Gary's story, and Gary and Richard split up. They had a big fight. He was actually sitting in my kitchen the day he got the phone call from Richard that it was over.
Wow.
And he sunk down into really a Great Depression and tried to figure out a way to himself move forward. And it was funny because at the time he was supposed to be playing Professor Higgins in My Fair Lady touring the country. And my daughter was playing in My Fair Lady at the Ipswich High School. So when Gary sort of, fell off the wagon in a way, I mean, he didn't start drinking and drugging again, but he really went to a Great Depression, and he left My Fair Lady. He came up here and started coaching the kids at the Ipswich High School in this play. And we remained really close friends, and I watched his own personal struggle. When we kept saying Gary's the story, I mean, he's really interesting. And we kept filming him. And then we couldn't raise the money. And then at a certain point, we stopped, and we were sort of stalled. We didn't know what to do. And Gary had worked with us trying to raise the money and was really involved. And then Bester Cram sold the company and took the film with him. And we're like, well, what do we do with it now? We had all this footage we've been shooting for all these years just shoved in a box. And we said, well, let's get the box and look at what's there. And, Mike Majoris came on board and went through all the footage, and it was really clear the story's about Gary. So, but the last time we'd seen Gary was not in a good place. And we couldn't end the film on Gary not in a good place, because what had happened in the years since is that he'd really become a success story. He became a Hazleton author. He wrote a book on the 12 steps. He came up with his own play that he wrote, Pass It On, continued to perform, where he played Bill W. And then he moved to Florida, sort of the epicenter of the opioid crisis. And he started working with young adults and counseling them and mentoring them in Florida. And it's an incredibly difficult job because he loses his kids all the time.
Right.
But Gary's thing is he stays alive and he stays sober by helping others and really practicing the 12 steps. So we got a camera, and the three of us, Josh, myself, Bester, we went down to Florida, and we filmed what was going on 7 years later with Gary and his life. And Richard, who he'd had the big breakup with and hadn't spoken to in 7 years, came down and met him in Florida, and they made amends. So what ended up happening in the film, and you'll see, is that we're not really explaining what the 12 steps are. Here's step one, here's step two. We're seeing them practice in real life.
Right.
And we're seeing people making up, and we're seeing people making moral inventories, and we're seeing people making amends. And Gary counted, and he thinks they're all there. All the steps are there except for maybe one or two. But you're really seeing it put into practice in the film.
So I have questions. Well, first of all, it's not clear to me. Was Gary one of the actors in the Watertown production of the play? He was not. Okay, no. It was at the same play, or was it?
It was Steve Bergman and Janet's play. So it had 4 main characters and some other bit characters. And what happened with that play is it ended up going off Broadway. So we went down with Northern Light and something like 5 cameras and filmed the play, and made a DVD out of it that got sold at the Hazelden bookstore.
Oh. By
Hazelden Publishing. And, then we ended up going to the 75th year anniversary of AA in San Antonio. And Gary and Richard, these Florida actors, were performing Bill W. and Dr. Bob there. And that's when we met, and that's when we started filming them.
Okay, got it. And then you were talking about going to some meetings in the early years of, kind of working on this project. And that struck me as interesting, because I can't imagine that most meetings would want a film crew there. Is that true? I mean, they don't mind?
They didn't know we were a film crew at that point. I was just going.
You were just going without filming, right?
Yeah, and Al-Anon too. Al-Anon's a really important part of the story. I think just as important. Yeah. But so then when we did get to, anonymity was a big problem in making this film. I think was one of the reasons we got stuck for so long. So in making the film, what we did about that was a big question, is how do you film an AA meeting, right?
Yeah, right.
You want it to be anonymous. I didn't want actors playing the people. It's just fake. You want real emotions coming out in a meeting and to really show people what goes on. And we had that in our film. And the way that we did it was we were working with Hazelden, a recovery center in Minnesota, very famous. We had made the DVD for them, and they set up in Minnesota. They said, anybody wants to do a mock AA meeting, come to this church after your meeting and we'll do a mock meeting. And so we filmed that.
Okay. So I didn't know any of this stuff about how you were this close to Gary. You'd become a personal friend of his.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I think that some of that warmth comes through because I get the impression that he is that guy all the time. First of all, he's a performer. Second of all, he's an alcoholic. His emotions are right at the, right on the edge of his, right on the surface of his skin all the time, probably, right?
Yeah.
But he's also very open and giving and warm and funny. I mean, I said piece of work. Maybe that's not a very kind way of saying it, but I mean, he's a compelling person, and that comes through loud and clear in the film. And the fact that now that I know that you're personally friends with him, that probably has even more to do with it, because he's comfortable. He's comfortable working on this project and putting himself out there.
Yeah. And now he's a big deal. I mean, he just told me he was invited to Minnesota to speak, and there were 1,400 people in the room during COVID, and they got there 3 hours early to get a seat and wait for him to come.
Wow.
And he's an amazing performer. He got a 5-minute ovation. I mean, he's really powerful.
Yeah. So, Susan, you are, as I mentioned earlier, you have been one of our judges many times in past years, and you're not filling that role this year for a few reasons. And one is that you have a film, I think, in the festival this year, but you've had films in the festival in past years. You've sort of had to recuse yourself from obviously judging on your own films, but you had Circus Without Borders several years ago, and then I might have been my first year actually with the festival. A few years after it started, you had Killer Poet, right, in the festival.
Right. Good for you.
Which was one of the ones that one of the first films that I remember working on and really enjoying. So, what's the difference for you between coming as a part of the group of filmmakers who are presenting and sort of sitting back and looking at everybody else's films as one of the judges? You've experienced the festival from different angles in past years.
Yeah. Well, I also have a really good friend. We started making films together at the Columbia Journalism School, and we made all our first films. We were on the Red Dot team and made our first films together. And he also has a film in the festival, The Impossible Project. So that was 2 that I was really close to. But when I'm a judge, a lot of times you want to go actually into the theater and see how the audience reacts to the film before you make your final decision. So you spend a lot of the festival doing that, and you don't get to go to any of the filmmaker events. And I love the Newburyport Film Festival because you do get the filmmakers in, and it's so small that we end up spending a lot of time together and really getting to know each other.
Yeah.
The great part about being a judge is you've watched all of their films. So when you meet them, you really have a lot to talk about. And I'm going to have to see how I can watch as many as possible for that reason. But I just felt like it's nice to be on the director's side.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, we do. I mean, we pride ourselves on being the Filmmakers Film Festival. You know, we're little and we're plucky and we're survivors, and we've been around for 17 years now. And that is definitely one of the things that we really try to do every year. And we've had a great successful run of bringing as many filmmakers as possible to Newburyport for that exact reason. I mean, obviously our audience loves the interaction and hearing directly from the filmmakers. I mean, when you go to any film festival, you're going to probably see some Q&As after the film screenings, but we have an extraordinarily high percentage, I think, of filmmakers who actually are able to come in person when we're able to come in person.
Yeah.
When there's not a pandemic.
And I think it really changes things when you can bring the characters from your film to the stage and have a real conversation, which this film is way better when Gary's up on that stage explaining, okay, this is step number 1 and this is step number 2,
right.
And he will be there. Yeah. So it would be wonderful if people in the recovery community in the area knew about the film and could come. I think it's a really great tool for people if you want your normie friends and family to understand what it's all about. It's a really great gateway film to understand.
So I was going to ask, I mean, he is confirmed, right? That he's coming. He's going to be able to get here.
He's bringing his 80-year-old sponsor and his 22-year-old sponsee with him as well.
Wow. Oh, that's pretty cool. And you're coming.
And I'm coming.
So we'll have you. So we'll probably sort of recap some of this conversation then with them on stage after we screen the film.
Yeah, and I hope Mike and Bester are coming. I don't think Josh is coming, but I hope Mike and Bester will be there as well. Okay,
great. Yep. Well, let's save some of the good stuff for that discussion. And for now, let's call this a day, and hopefully we've encouraged some more people to come see the film. But I would highly encourage the opportunity to see Gary and his sponsor and his sponsee and the filmmaking team all talk about the film after we screen it. We're publishing our full schedule within a matter of days. And in the meantime, if you've watched this video, please let your friends and family know about the film and the other films that we're going to be announcing shortly. This is a really good one. So, Susan, we're looking forward to seeing you when you get here.
Thank you.